Take it away.
Yep. So yeah, then welcome from my side as well on this topic on how to become a little bit more productive as a developer, as a Java developer specifically. So 20 tips and tricks I want to share with you. So let's jump right in. My name is Sebastian. I do stuff with Java. And as a first productivity tip, I really would advise to spend some more time on the keyboard, because as developers, that's what what we should do, where we should spend our time on, especially when we know how to touch type. That's why we have F and J in our home row on the keyboard to just like type faster. There's a lot of science behind that, whether it makes more sense to use the mouse or the keyboard. Always when you have, I would say, some limited set of actions to perform something, like typing, for example, then it just makes more sense to have more keys available to be able to type. And then specifically, when you're typing into your editor or into your IDE, you want to become a power user of that IDE. You want to leverage the power that you have in the IDE. So I have IntelliJ here, which is by far my most favorite IDE that I'm using all the time, just because of the awesome features it has. And then, when we do anything in our IDE, it has a lot of shortcuts available, a lot of methods, a lot of things that help us in just do anything. Actually, most of the things we would just take for granted. For example, any IDE shortcut. And if we think of it, that's all just goes back to automation. So, for example, when I write a class, and actually I'm editing some enterprise application here that I will show a little bit later. So what I just did, I created a class, right? I did not write public class config resource, which is supposed to be a JAX REST resource, but I wrote that here. So that is already, some form of automation that you can just leverage. Then, anything that would just help you when it comes to refactoring. I'll show a little bit more of that in a second. Or things that I really enjoy, that is called live templates, or in IntelliJ at least, they're called live templates, that really makes your life easier. So for example, that is JAX-RS at path. You see I type faster than I can talk. That is an annotation that you need in JAX-RS all the time, where I say this is supposed to be the resource under /config, right? And you saw I just typed a live template and hit tab, because it's so much faster than typing at path and selecting the correct import. Or if you use something like at inject and then select the correct import, if you use enterprise Java, you use this all the time, right? So many times you write at inject, so it's just so much faster to do this and then hit tab, and then you can inject some bean or whatever. Or in my case, let me just quickly do this. We have a string method for a configuration that we want to emit here. And then, for example, in this case, I will show this later what it does. It uses another API that is called microprofile-config, where I inject a config property that in my case is called greetings. And I type this all the time, so it really makes sense to define a live template. IntelliJ already ships with a bunch of live templates there for Java, but greetings, there's no template for that to spell correctly. But it makes sense to define your own ones. So for example, if you have something like Java, then this doesn't make sense here, but you can type main or PSVM for public static void main instead of typing that yourself, right? And many things like, private, static, final, and so on and so forth. All of these things that we keep typing all over again. If you have some variable that you define, like a string something, and then you can say, for example, string test is something. You saw that is, by the way, Control-Shift-Enter. There's a lot of tips and tricks out there. We can say .null and then hit tab, and then it includes a live template for null checking. Or other ones that I found useful, for example, for the sake of Java Enterprise, is a post-construct method, a pre-destroy method, things like entity manager, all these things that we keep typing all over again. And these are just examples for the particular bits and pieces I'm using. Because if you use, any framework, any other thing, whether it's Spring, whether it's, any third-party library, you will identify these boilerplates, code snippets that you keep typing all over again. So it really makes sense to just define live templates for them and then just be faster. Then enough on the IDE, a few more things that I want to share about the command line. So if we have a look in our command line, and that is my command line here, then we should, well, also think about spending more time into the command line. Why? Because in the command line, you can do whatever you would like to do in the computer by typing, by using your keyboard and just typing in commands, especially if you're on a Unix-based operating system. And in this case, what we typically do, well, we use something like Maven, MVN, or Git on the command line, which I think makes a lot of sense. Despite the IDE integration, I always use Git on the command line. And that, it just makes it faster to say, okay, in our case, I want to build this project, Maven package, rather than clicking your way around and doing something like this. Well, missing return statement. Yeah, that's true. Greetings. No, thanks. And then we can, that, for example, is already a helpful feature to select the last command. I'm pretty sure you know about all of these things. Later on, I will point you to some resources how to get there faster. But one of the biggest improvements in using the command line, I think, is shell aliases. So you can set aliases for any command that you would type in your command line. So for example, instead of typing Maven package, what I just did, you can just, not PM, but MP, you just create your own alias and you're so much faster, right? So instead of typing all these things all over again, you could say, well, git status is faster than just typing it, or git commit, or git push into the current branch origin, and so on and so forth. Or if you use, if you use Docker, Docker builds, Docker run, if you use Kubernetes, kubectl get services, kubectl get pods, kubectl apply, we could continue all day. So there are many, many commands out there available that you would just keep typing all over again. You can have a look into your shell history, Z shell or bash history, and then do some command line magic with sorting the commands that are in there, and you can sort by usage, and then you see which commands you are typing all over again, where it makes sense to apply them just faster. Shell shortcuts, that's also really, really helpful. We'll point you to some resources how to get a little bit faster on the command line in general, but that is actually why I use the command line all the time now. I actually don't even use a file explorer. I use my command line to do all these things, because when you have some shortcuts, for example, if you type something and you have some output here, you probably know about clear, that clears your current window, but it also is just possible to hit Control and L for clear. And similarly, you can define your own ones. For example, I defined Control K to just do a similar thing, clear and display the current directory, right? Or Control J for do the same thing, but with a tree with one level, or H with two levels that shows you, now the font is a little bit big, it just shows you the current contents of the directory, which is just really, really fast. So if you go into the source directory, you see where are we, and I think that's just so much easier to use than your file explorer or something like that. So I think that just really makes sense, well, regardless of the language that you're using, so for Java developers as well as any other developers, to just be a little bit faster. And then, of course, automation, scripting. The main reason why we should spend some time in the command line, because it's just so much faster to do any automation job instead of manually, even putting in some commands one after another. So for example, let's create a script, how to build our application. That, by the way, was also a shortcut. If we say Maven clean package our application, then that is the first step, how to build our application. Then the next step, of course, is Docker build this into an image, and then if you want, we can push the image, and then we can Docker run that image or something like that, right? All the steps that are necessary in order to do this, and then push will not work, but the run will work. Then we can actually just execute this, and then it will do all the steps for us. So instead of doing this manually, what we can do, we can relax, lean back, enjoy our coffee while our application is building and starting up, right? It just really makes sense, because that is the way how to, I would say, use the computer correctly by doing automation. And the command line is a really, really easy way to that, even if we're not, shell experts. I wrote many shell scripts, but I'm totally not a bash or shell expert. I always have to Google the syntax and everything, but it's just really convenient. It really helps you to become more productive because of automation. And the command line is a really easy way to do that. And you can script, literally everything, especially when you're on a Unix environment. Then, oh yeah, that's a fun topic. Use Vim's way of typing. This Vim editor, this crazy editor, nobody knows how to exit. I actually used this editor now many years. And I have to say, I'm not even the biggest fan of the editor. I don't care if you use this or not. But what I care about is that way of typing, because it makes you so much faster to edit any type of text, not only code, also any type of text. I wrote my book in Vim, no kidding, with AsciiDoc, because it has multiple layers of text input. So the idea why it is so productive is that you try to eliminate all the context switches, not just your mental context switches, what you're thinking about, but also the hand movements. So instead of saying, well, I'm typing now, and now I want to, let's say, go up there with my cursor, so I have to move my hand a little bit to the arrow keys or to any other weird hand movement, that will just have a break into your flow, because you either have to look into the keyboard where you're moving at, or you just have to rearrange your hands. And instead of doing this, what Vim does, it just has multiple input layers, like overloading the keys for what you can do. So that is why you cannot type anything here. You cannot have an input instead, unless you type a key like I for insert, and then you can actually have an input. And then if you hit escape, then you're back in the so-called normal mode, and that is W and B, moving word forward, work backwards, or this famous movement with just a home row, H, J, K, and L, and then you can do all kinds of funny things like copying text and moving around. You can have composable commands together with actions, and that just makes it really quick, really fast to edit text. And once you get used to that, you want to have this movement everywhere. So that's actually the reason why also, if you noticed, my IDE looks that weird. So I have this weird big cursor that is actually a Vim emulation. So there's an IDEA Vim plugin, which is really helpful. The same way I'm using a Vim emulation on my Z shell. So you can do the same things. And if you just input something like that, it's just so much faster to move around and delete something, rather than using the backspace, which is just so much slower. So once you get used to it, it's really fast to do so. And also in Vim, like in any other editor, you can also, and you should, define some live templates, even for some my code snippets or text snippets or even words that you keep typing all over again. So for example, when I say, my name is Sebastian Daschner, right? I'm a developer advocate. I work with Java, Java EE, Jakarta EE, OpenLiberty, Kubernetes, all these things, all the words that you keep typing all over. And at first it looks funny if you say, well, do you have to define a live template for that? But it really helps you just to become quicker at what you're doing. That is actually the reason why, no kidding, I'm writing my emails in Vim, because it's so much faster to say something like, dear sir or madam, hello world, best regards, Sebastian. Take this, copy, and there you go. And it's so much faster to use all the other keys on your keyboard and constantly switching your hand positions. And I think that's the way to go. Then more tips and tricks. Now, second page of our slides. Try to use some hot reload mechanisms. So in the previous session today that I did, that was on Quarkus, that already has a quite famous Quarkus development mode that is actually a hot reload mechanism, where you can start up your application, change something in the code, and you can wait for it. It immediately reloads. But what I'm showing now is another enterprise runtime called OpenLiberty, which also has a similar mode that I actually, for one reason, like even better. So OpenLiberty is a modern runtime on Jakarta and MicroProfile. It runs your applications, and the current version is super fast. That starts up actually really quickly. And this is what I have here. Let's rid out of this mode. And this is just the default application that I'm using here. And what I want to show you is this development mode liberty:dev, similar to Quarkus dev, but it can actually do a few things more. So it now also will start up your runtime, like, your, by the way, another shortcut that is, I think, called hello or something like that. Hello/greetings, I think hello, something like this. It's still starting up if I have, yes. I think my computer is under load right now, so let's see. Oops, that was, oh yeah, the injection point. I have to look into that probably because I did a mistake. Yeah, it's called greeting, not greetings. So besides the hard reload mechanism the first time, liberty:dev. Let me just clean this. The first time you have to start up, it tries to load and start up your application. So of course you have to have some proper valid code, not just what I played around here. And then what it will do, it will start up your application and you can make some changes here and then watch your changes being reflected. And this sounds somewhat trivial, but it's really, really key to having a productive development setup because you don't want to wait for your changes to happen. And also at the same time, you want to verify your changes on a more end-to-end level. So I can also, write a class and write a unit test for it, but that only gets you so far. At the end, you want to see whether your app works correctly and whether, you see hello over HTTP, including the correct status codes and all these things, whether your app works as expected. So what you can do here, of course, all these things that you can change some code and you see the change being reflected there immediately and so on and so forth. So that will just reload your application and then you can see the exclamation mark here. But also what's a little bit more fun, if you change something like my config here, that is actually displayed by loaded by some configuration. So this is why I was using this one here. So, you can make some changes in your properties file, for example, and they also will be picked up and then you see, hey, exclamation mark. So that is just one thing that helps you staying in the flow because you don't have to wait, right? I made some changes and the changes are there immediately. And this is now a different technology that I was showing with Quarkus. So it works with different approaches. It's not really a question of the technology, even it's more a question of the approach you're using and how to build such a workflow that helps you develop faster locally in order to keep these turnaround cycles short. Why? Because we're just humans, we get distracted otherwise. It does make a huge difference whether I have to wait 2 seconds or 10 seconds. It's not 5 times more productive, it's 1,000 times more productive. Because if I wait 2 seconds, wait 2 seconds. It's a little bit, could be better, but it's fine. If I wait 10 seconds, I'd be like, yeah, let's check my smartphone, let's look into Slack, and then my attention is gone and I'm doing something else. So I'm out of this flow. So what I want to do, I want to have this short turnaround. Same for test feedback scenarios. So in the same way, and this is why I like this development mode of Liberty, if you hit enter, it will automatically run your unit tests and integration tests. So I have a unit test here that just tests for my hello, which is now, of course, hello exclamation mark. So I have to fix that test. And then I can immediately hit enter and get the immediate response. So it's right there. And now next test fails, my integration test suite, which also, and this actually already connects against my application that is running there, and now expect some exclamation marks also. And then I see both test suites being green, and that is the immediate feedback I was talking about. So I can change some production code, I see the changes, I can change my tests, I rerun my tests, and I don't have to wait for anything there. So it's just, I think, very productive to use. Have a lot of material to share how to build up efficient test suites, some more on that. But moving on, what else you should do as a Java developer? So if you think that further, then of course, continuous delivery is the next step in automation, like how to deploy and deliver your software with all these steps that you can define being executed automatically. That's the whole point, in order to actually be more reliable and to have more security, whether stuff works later on. Everything as code, that's also an interesting thing to follow. If we think of Docker files and also Kubernetes YAMLs, That's actually a nice way of putting infrastructure as code, of saying, well, we have a code definition of how our infrastructure, for example, looks like. So this can be automated. Same if you build some ASCII-doc file or Markdown, that's also file as code, documentation as code, as well as configuration as code. So it just makes sense to put it into version control and to have some automation around it. Manage distractions, yeah, in these times that's a little bit more challenging. So it's a whole topic around trying to focus what we're doing. So any email, any Slack, any phone notification will just throw us off our work that we're trying to do. So easy trying to silence them. Phone has a feature called flight modes. Slack, email can be closed, so you actually only see what you want to work in right now, at least for a while, like half an hour or an hour, will make you much more productive. Oh, two more things. Read the documentation and write some documentation. That in general is just combined with the idea that you should, as funny as it sounds, know what you're doing. So it will make you more efficient to actually, read what your frameworks are actually doing under the hood, how they work, how the concepts look like. If you look into some new technology, whatever it is, it will always pay off if you invest some time to actually sit down and go read a book or read the documentation, really trying to understand the concepts before you just try out some stuff. Of course, trying out stuff is part of the game, but especially if you work on some project code, it really makes a difference whether you're more productive. And writing documentation the same, if you can contribute that back, it helps you a lot to basically teach others. Or in the same way, actually teach yourself, like teach your future self. Because in 2 weeks from now, you will not know anymore what you've done today. So try to write documentation as if you would write it for your future self, and it will help you a lot, saving time in the future, because you can just read your thoughts of today, what you were planning back then. Taking a step back and reflecting what you're doing, that's also a great tool, actually, especially for automation, like trying to find these, shortcuts or aliases that I was talking about, which commands am I typing all over again, which boilerplate code am I putting in all the time, and then just trying to, take a step back and look at that and say, okay, actually, I should define just some automation for it. And that will make you so much more efficient if you can break out of this loop. And then also always keep learning, especially now you can use that time to have some online courses, to look into some new tech, to look into some new programming languages, for example. It will definitely help your future career. A few more things that I want to share with you. I will post some links later today. So there's a video if you want to look into this development mode that I was talking about. Also, I have a video course in that whole topic of developer productivity. Quite a while ago, but it touches many more points that you might have a look at, available for free. Another thing I wanted to share, I found these very helpful. If you use IntelliJ, the videos that are put together on the YouTube channel, or if you follow on Twitter, you can learn a lot, and these shortcuts are really worth that time of learning, because you will just get much more productive. And a last thing I want to announce, actually exclusively today, so that's the very first time I'm talking about that, I am about to start a podcast on this topic of how to become more effective as a developer. It's called The Effective Developer, out now. You can have a look on Anchor FM or on Spotify. I will post the link, but for you to know already, you can follow that, where we'll just talk a little bit more with background and experiences, like talking about flow principles and some mindsets to follow to become more productive and to make our job and work a little bit more enjoyable. So I think we're soon also at the end of our time and ready for Q&As. So that's it, what I wanted to share for now. And I'm very looking forward to some questions that you folks might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. Really interesting talk. And I think a lot of people gained a lot from that. We have several questions, actually. So we've got a couple on Slido, which I'll ask. So first question is, how do you organize and keep your doc files up to date? For example, all of the different live templates and aliases that you showed us.
Yeah, easy, Git. Just put them as
simple answer.
Exactly. As code, it was here, everything as code, and put them into a Git repository, and then you can just share them. And when you get a new computer, you take like 10 minutes to set it up, because you point to all of the dot files that you put into your Git and download them in easy. Especially if you have something that you can store as code, which is true for most of the tools out there as of today.
Great. Okay.
I think in IntelliJ also recently you can share them, your live templates and things like that as code.
Fantastic. So it's portable in that way as well.
As far as I understood, yeah.
Great. And then another question is, where do you run your tests? Do you run them from the terminal or from the IDE you're using?
Oh, depends. So usually for my IDE, it depends a little bit on the tests. So if I use Liberty, then I use the Liberty Dev, just because it's a little bit faster. Actually, I think it starts up faster because it's already running. So you just hit enter and then it runs both the unit and integration tests. Other than that, usually in the IDE or via Maven, if I have some other setup, if I have to point some system properties to point it to a different cluster, for example, for system tests. My system tests I run usually via the command line with some prior setup, or then using a script.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about a great way to get more comfortable with Java developing is to read and write documentation. Are there any cheat sheets or help sites or templates that you use when you're writing documentation? Where do we go to start off?
That's a good question. So when I write documentation myself, it already helps if you just start with something plain text, like, literally putting your thoughts on paper, because just as a reminder of yourself. And then once you have the time or you want to make it look a little bit nicer for somebody else, then it makes sense to, write some proper ASCII doc or something like that. Other than that, how to get documentation, I found in general JavaDoc actually a pretty good tool, because you have your documentation right where the code is, or at least how to use a method and all that. Other than that, any way how to easily publish it to a website. And this can be ASCII doc or Markdown to some HTML, and then just very easily consumable, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And one last question we got on the Slack channel is, so what's the best, in your opinion, what is the best productive build framework, Maven or Gradle?
It really
difficult one.
I mean, Gradle is much more flexible than Maven is. For most of my projects, I use Maven just because it's good enough. It has everything that you would need, and it's more like the opposite way. If you need something else, then probably you should rethink what you're doing, because for a typical enterprise projects, what I'm doing, Maven is more than sufficient, and you should not need anything else, I would say. It might be a little bit faster also. Well, that depends how you set it up. I'm personally use Maven, but I don't have much preferences. It really depends how you use them for both of them.
Okay, great. I'm sure you can add some more detail on the Slack channel.
Yep.
You can create a thread there. Thank you so much for joining us, Sebastian. Really appreciate that, and it's been a really interesting talk. Thank you very much. And as we said, please keep asking questions. Sebastian will be available on the Slack channel to answer any additional ones that you may have.